Okay.
Yeah, let's give it a try.
So are we starting over again?
Yes.
Okay.
Alright, why don't you all introduce yourselves?
My name is Wade John Darbone.
And I'm Elizabeth Suzanne Darbone,
And what year were you all born?
I was born in 1957.
and I was born in 1951.
And where were you all born?
I was born in Morgan City, Louisiana.
In Dallas, Texas.
Dad, why don't you tell a little bit about the Darbone family name?
Well, the Darbone family name is somewhat unique in the family history, as the only ones in the family history that have the name are my dad's immediate family. When my dad was very young, his father died and his mother remarried, and so all of his siblings have a different name, which is Gautier.
And then, Mom, why don't you tell about how Grandpa got the Gaylord name?
Well, his original father's last name was Cheres, C-H-E-R-E-S. And he died when my dad was 6 or 7. And his mother remarried again to a freeman. Now, we never met him because when we were born, he had already passed on. And his mother, my grandmother, had a sister, Rose, and she had married a William Gaylord. And at some point, my dad lived with my Aunt Rose and this William Gaylord. And at some point, he took the name Gaylord. We don't know if they adopted him or why he took the name, but he did live with them for quite a while. So we became Gaylord, and
So what happened?
and we haven't really been able to find any information on Cherise. Now, my dad, who's 94 now, said he had 2 aunts from the Civil War time, and both lived to be 100. But we only met his mother and his Aunt Rose, and those are really the only 2 relatives in his family that we ever met.
Okay. Now, why don't you tell what it was like growing up in different cities along the Gulf Coast?
Well, my dad worked for a seismographic crew, and seismographic crews are basically the crews that do the sonic exploration for oil deposits. And basically, at that point in time, the way that they typically would do this is they would actually set off dynamite charges. And so they'd have various pieces of measuring equipment, so many hundreds of yards or so from the wherever the dynamite was set, and then measure the sound waves as they pass through the Earth's crust and then back up. The nature of the business is that you would go across the country, and the crew would move from location to location every few weeks. And so up until the time I was about 6, we basically lived in just about every town up and down the Louisiana and Texas Gulf Coast. We'd move into a town, we lived in a trailer, we moved into a town that would be there for anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'd move on to the next small town.
Alright, Mom, why don't you tell what it was like growing up in the Park Cities area?
Well, we didn't live in the Park Cities area. Well, actually, when my grandparents first came down to the Dallas area, because this is where work was, and they were originally up in Boston, and he was an architect, and there really wasn't any work. So they came down here to the Dallas area. And the rich people lived right around the Swiss Avenue and right around downtown, but the people who weren't quite as well off moved out to Carew Farms, which is now the University Park, Highland Park. So they built a house out there, and really all my grandmother's siblings came out there and built homes. Now, we grew up in the White Rock Lake area, I guess I would really say, but really I've lived my entire life in Dallas and never lived anywhere else, so not quite as much adventure as your dad had.
I bet, what would you say is one of the most interesting stories from visiting like your extended family back in Louisiana?
Well, my family basically, it's all throughout South Louisiana, but most of them are, they reside in the St. Martinville area, which is 9 miles south of Lafayette. And that's effectively considered the heart of Cajun country. And so when you hear Cajun stories or Acadiana stories, they are all focused in the Lafayette, Louisiana area. Now, as you go further east, and you get closer to New Orleans, and then basically it changes from pure Acadiana, which has a very French background, to more of a Creole flavor, which is what you get when you get closer to New Orleans. My mother's family came from a small town called Napoleonville, actually named after Napoleon. It's, to put it precisely where it is, it's halfway in between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. It's about 60 miles from New Orleans. And they are more swamp people. You know, they're, when you think about typical South Louisiana, and you know, people who lived on the swamps, and they lived in the Pirogues and everything else, and they would go in and out of New Orleans with trade. And that's basically the type of people who lived in the eastern half of Louisiana. When you go to the western half, which is where the Cajun country is, it's more almost plantation-like. Lots of sugarcane land, lots of various plantation-style activities. You see a lot of big homes. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, actually had a 1,000-acre rice plantation, and just outside of St. Martinville.
Okay. Mom, did you ever go on like an exciting family vacation to visit some of the extended family, or anywhere that you really remember growing up?
No, we were actually pretty, well, we were a huge family, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't go on vacations much. But actually, the one trip that I do really remember, I was really young, and we went to, my Uncle Harold had a country place, and he actually flew us in a small private plane, and a little kind of biplane.
This was Harold Bird, right?
Harold Bird. And so he was, you know, definitely into flying. And I remember being really small and getting really airsick. And we flew and sat down in this watermelon patch, and they cut open watermelon. And I didn't fly again in an airplane until I was 26 years old. So, and I do remember that, but you know, after that time, we really didn't go on that many vacations. Dad was a salesman, and so he'd go and travel around in his car, and so every once in a while he'd take one of us with him, and that's about it.
Dad, what was one of your favorite memories from going to school, at least, you know, maybe when you settled in Corpus a little bit more permanently?
What?
You're gonna have to narrow the question down a little bit, because you know
Do you remember anything, you know, that you really enjoyed about going to school around the area?
Well, we settled down. As I said, until I was 6, we basically moved every couple months. Don't really recall living in any one place more than a couple months. Right around the 1st grade, we actually moved to it was an abandoned naval air station just outside Corpus Christi. And my dad had a job where he drove a vacuum truck, but part of his job was also to man a station, you know, a vacuum station at this abandoned naval air station. And so there were only 3 trailers on the entire naval air station, and it was a World War II training station. And so you had all these warehouses, and you had all these plane parts laying out in the open and everything, and it was actually pretty exciting to live there as a kid, because there were all these, they were actually just empty gas tanks, but I always thought they were bombs. And so, you know, you go out and make believe that, you know, they have warplanes and everything all over the place, and it was kind of fun. We lived there when I was in 1st and 2nd grade. In 3rd and 4th grade, we moved to a small cotton town called Taft, Texas. And then in the 5th grade, I moved into Corpus, and I basically went to junior high and high school in Corpus Christi.
Well, what was one of your favorite memories with Uncle John? I remember you always talked about going to the movie theater.
Oh, yeah, actually that's funny because I was just thinking about that. It was in the Lakewood area, and you know, the Lakewood Theater is still there, and so my parents would drop me and my brother off, sometimes my older sister, but we could go to the movie theater for a quarter and you could get a drink and some candy, and they'd drop us off on Saturday morning. Every Saturday morning we watched, they'd show these serials. I remember one was called The Iron Claw. But one of the best times was all the big fancy movie theaters used to be in downtown Dallas, and they had like the Palace and the Majestic, and I forget the names of some of the others. But I remember they were showing a James Bond marathon, and I remember Daddy took us downtown and dropped us off, and we sat in this movie theater and we watched like 3 James Bond movies, and that was, I was like blown away. I thought, wow, you know, that is so cool. I also remember downtown Dallas when they had streetcars that were on the electric.
Over on McKinney Avenue in there?
No, it was all downtown,
Oh, okay.
and they were streetcars, and they, you know, they were electric, and they ran on the wires all through downtown. Wish they still had those.
Now, you both can answer this question, but how do you remember first meeting? Like first date, first meeting, kind of, you know.
Oh, us?
Yeah.
I saw him in the elevator, and I asked Paul Bosler, I said, you know, wow, look at that cute guy in the elevator, and he just said, oh, you won't like him.
Well, to clarify the story, we both work for the same company.
Right.
And we both work in the same building in downtown Dallas.
What company is that?
ExxonMobil.
Well, it was Mobile.
It was Mobil Oil at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had actually, Susie had been working there for a number of years already, and I had been working for a company in Houston called Superior Oil, and Mobil bought them, and so they offered me a job in Dallas, which happened to be in the same building that Susie was already in. And so we started running to each other basically on the street, because we both took the bus, different buses, but we'd see each other in the elevator or whatever else. And then we, at some point, I accepted a position moving from accounting to IT. And part of that was to go to a specific type of training. And it was a 2-week course where they'd send you off to a hotel off-site. And so, lo and behold, you know, I'd seen Susie on the street corner and, you know, thought she was really pretty and everything else, but I hadn't really spoken to her. I go to this course, and there she is sitting at the same conference table as I am, just a couple of people down. So there
And I desperately tried to get out of going to this course because I didn't want to go stay in that hotel for 2 weeks by the airport. I desperately tried to get out, and I showed up and I looked over and I thought, wow, there's that guy. And they even had his name wrong. They called him Wayne. And I thought, oh, that's his name, Wayne. But so that's how we met.
Do you remember the proposal?
It's in California.
On Highway 1.
On Highway 1. Sitting on a cliff looking out over the Pacific Ocean. So there you go. And your interview is going to be very large.
Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Is that all you need?
Yeah. I mean, that was probably 10 minutes, at least.
Yeah, that's a very large video file.
So did you really get the kind of information that you need?
Yeah.